evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming out to the LOFT Film Festival and watching Awake, A Dream at Standing Rock. I'm here to thank all the sponsors. First, my name is Melody Lopez. I really, from the bottom of my heart, want to thank the staff at the LOFT. We have not only some of the best staff, but I gotta tell you, our volunteers, the people who are checking you off, the people with the popcorn, we have the best volunteers at the LOFT. They really keep this place running. The LOFT is a great organization, a true treasure in Tucson. That's not even on here. That's just me talking about the LOFT. Oh, look, there's another board member, Tim. Woo! Another board member, because we support the LOFT. We love it. That's why we're here. The movie, as you know, is Awake, A Dream from Standing Rock. It's directed by Myron Dewey, Josh Fox, and James Spioni. It's 84 minutes, and we're very lucky tonight because we have Myron Dewey with us, who will be doing a quick opening. He's awesome. He's a really amazing man, not only in doing this documentary, but he works a lot with youth. And he came out to San Javier District this summer, and he was part of a series of Land Speaks talking to our youth from these communities. And he was just very inspirational, very honest with them. So I look forward to doing the Q&A with him tonight. Our film is sponsored by the U of A American Indian Studies. So that's a great link to have. Let me see. I think that's all I have to say because I know you're waiting to see the film. Myron, is there anything you want to say to help them open it up?
First,
I would like to acknowledge the land we're on, the indigenous people's land where we're at here, and thank you, LOFT, and acknowledge the directors and editors and all the water protectors, the 831 that 400 of them are still going through the process of the due process that's being violated out in North Dakota. What I really like you guys to do is we really need you to look at not just a documentary, but this is a visual legal narrative. And we're still in the fight to make sure that we don't have political prisoners. And right now we have two, Red Fawn and Little Feather. Red Fawn's at a halfway house and Little Feather is incarcerated. And we have 150 that have felonies. And the other violations we're seeing that are happening that we don't know about. And they brought out a retired judge for these next 400, which is scary. Because when our people get into the colonial system, into the colonial law and the colonial courts, the colonial judge, the colonial district attorney, defense, all those things, it's not in our favor. And so I kept this in mind when I was filming that this was a repeat of history that we were seeing. And so the things that you're going to see in here, from officers smiling and laughing while they were abusing people, to the human rights violations, the constitutional violations, and now the systematic racism in the court, this is something to be very well aware of. And I want to thank also the tribes that helped, the allies that came out and supported. And thank you guys so much for standing with us and standing in solidarity. And what we're also going to witness is the next generation of unity. Thank you.
Wow. One word, wow. So please welcome Melody Lopez and director Myron Dewey.
Michelle is one of our women warriors that's been educating on divestment around the world. And I met her out at Standing Rock, and I interviewed her, and she was one of the attorneys in the very beginning there. And so she's been there and still going strong, and really strong pillar for our water protectors that are seeking justice for the human rights and constitutional violations, but educating the world with an indigenous woman's warrior voice. And I just want to really thank her for coming.
On that note, Myron, you stepped outside to get coffee, and so you missed your standing ovation. There was a really great standing ovation for this crowd. And in that, I'd like to actually begin by asking, I know that I've met a lot of people who have been water protectors. If there's any water protectors in the audience, can you please stand up? Standing ovation for these people.
I'm kind of curious, does the rest of the crowd not drink water?
Nice. So you saw that there's so many things to cover, and so I'd like to kind of start where you'd like to start with. You began with asking the audience to consider this as a visual legal experience.
A visual legal narrative.
Excellent, thank you. And can you, now that they've seen that, is there anything you'd like for them specifically to think about, or?
Well, I just want to really thank you all for just coming, and from here you're going to share this story because the battle is still going. But I know Michelle, from a legal perspective, this is I'll let her answer that. For my perspective, it was something for the attorneys to carry over, and I'm hoping that I did that. I'm hoping that I shared enough evidence in human rights and constitutional violations, which now we're seeing in the court as the due process violations. And I'll let Michelle add on to that.
Water protectors are still in an incredibly precarious situation. Yesterday, Vanessa Dundon, who was one of the victims of the night that the police sprayed water protectors with water cannons in sub-zero temperatures. Her court case is ongoing. Chase Iron Eyes, his court case is ongoing. Holyoke Lafferty, her court case is ongoing. There are many, many, many water protectors who still need your help and your support of their legal defense. You can look up Water Protector Legal Collective online to support them. In addition to this, there is also a divestment campaign which is happening right now, which is also Indigenous-led by mazaskatox.org. So there's lots to be done, but right now the fight certainly is not over for each and every water protector who is still facing criminal charges for doing nothing more than protecting their treaty land and protecting the water that is sacred to each and every one of us. We should be supporting them with all the resources that we possibly can for the stand that they made, not only for Indian country, but for the United States of America and the world. They are truly our heroes in the contemporary times, and we salute them for their bravery that they showed on the front lines, as well as for our brother here and many others who were able to go to great lengths to provide this type of documentation to you. There has been incredible state police repression as a result of the Dakota Access Pipeline. There is still denial in this world among decision makers that the human rights abuses even happened. When we go to the banks in Europe, we are still trying to plead the case that there was human rights abuses that occurred, and that divestment from these companies is necessary and immediately urgent. So there is still so much work to be done in regards to this encounter of Indigenous peoples fighting for justice and for self-determination of their lands and their futures.
Thank you. When I talk to a lot of non-natives in Tucson, I get the question, what is treaty land? That people don't understand that. Believe it or not, in Arizona, of our 22 tribes, only one has treaty. The rest of the tribal lands here were established by executive order. So that's not something as Arizonans is as common language. Would you mind explaining to the audience what treaty land is?
The United States is really a new nation. Indigenous peoples have been living here since time immemorial, and part of our history here in the United States are these international treaties that were created between all of our ancestors, both the indigenous ancestors and our brothers and sisters who came from across the sea. Those treaties were born from conflict and born to prevent situations like Standing Rock, to create and nurture peace within our very multicultural society. Indigenous peoples, we hold those treaties as sacred agreements, as legal contracts that are living, that define the rights and obligations between our indigenous peoples and the United States government. Treaties are, in Article 6 of the Constitution, supposed to be supreme law of the land, federal law, supreme law. However, we still continue to have problems with the United States government honoring those treaties and those very basic fundamental human rights, that indigenous peoples have a right to property that cannot be extinguished, that indigenous peoples have the right to their governments, that they have a right to their legal systems, and that they have a right to self-determination. This is what the treaty tradition of the United States should be. Right now, we are still, as indigenous peoples, fighting to have those treaties honored. And in the case of the Dakota Access Pipeline, we had a very clear violation of the treaty on lands that have never been ceded, that have never been given to the United States government by the Oceti-Sakowin, by the indigenous peoples who signed the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 and 1865. I believe.
Thank you. So Myron, you have been touring like a madman, and I'm taking a deep breath for you. There's a lot of work you do with people when you come, when you shoot this film. What's a major thing you would like this audience to understand about why you undertook this filmmaking process?
Well, first, seeing this was a repeated history. And the things that we had to battle out there from yellow journalism was very much real. And the history of who controls the media controls the culture. And this narrative, if this wasn't an indigenous-led movement, it would have been a civil rights movement and things would have changed. And we would have been called protesters and not water protectors. And the Dakota Access would have been able to justify their insurance, and Morton County would have been able to justify their federal funding, which they need to incite a riot in order to get that. And they continue to incite a riot. As you can see, they're the ones that showed up that way. Being a part of the prayer was something to document and witness. Now you guys get to see that, what one nation, 400 nations that came, and allies around the world got to witness. And what I mean, it puzzles me around the country when I ask people if they know what's going on that. I've seen a little bit on CNN or a little bit on nothing like what I show them about an Avenger with missile launchers up on the hill for the drones, or Homeland Security hanging outside with a sniper, or the Tiger Swan, the mercenaries that you guys, if you want to read that in the Intercept right now, who's trying to play victims. These are an international mercenary that's domestic and hired by the oil company. And also when you share with them that the Dakota Access just now gave a month ago the state of North Dakota $15 million, which we just witnessed the second decade of the 21st century Pinkertons. So this is something that we all need to be aware. It's not just an indigenous issue, it's a human issue, and it's going to affect you. And as a tribal member in exercising our inherent rights, that's also something that our allies got to witness. And so much more as a historical trauma trainer, as I started to see a lot that our allies were hurting, the pain, the embarrassment that they were witnessing, the desecration of sacred sites that were being right in front of everybody, the digging up right across the river, and the shame that I was shared with, the anger What? How can they do this? How come they're doing this? And it's like they're just finding out what it is to feel and to be indigenous. And when the Army Corps of Engineers would tell us something, we knew that was a lie automatically. And the easement, I knew it was a lie because my drone just got shot documenting them bringing in equipment. And I walked to that sacred fire when everyone was crying and they were laughing and excited, and I didn't want to be the Debbie Downer. It was really hard for me to walk away, and I just told my team, we got to go back to work. And we left. And we were at it again that night, documenting again. And as a cultural monitor, protecting our sacred sites was really hard to watch because back home we have to deal with grave robbers, shovel bums, hobbyist archaeologists, defacing our petroglyphs way out in the middle of nowhere with the modern tools that you have. So there's a lot that we have to fight in all four directions. But this is something that, on another side, is that we got to do in unity and solidarity, and we got to educate the world with some of the most educated people in Indian country that brought all their tools, their skills, their cultural knowledge, their medicines, their healing, their strength, and as well as our allies. And to witness 4,500 veterans come in and 550 churches come in and denounce the doctrine of discovery and acknowledge what that is. That's the first time I ever seen churches actually know what that meant and talk about the sexual abuse and apologize for the child molestation, apologize for the rape and the murders, which I, as a trauma trainer, historical trauma trainer, I cried when he was sharing that with me at the front line, because I work with youth all over the country with this. And so I shared with him, I said, well, brother, why don't you come to the front and pray? And he goes, wow, Myron, we don't get political. And I says, well, either, we're praying. And he goes, well, I'll think about it. And then I saw him the next day and he says, Myron, come here. And he lifted up he had this big white robe on and he lifted it up. And it had the attorney's number on the front, and they were heading to Bismarck to go pray for the governor. And they did go to jail. And I don't know how long they stayed in there, but one guy did stay in there a little bit to prove he wanted to share a message that this wasn't okay. So many people stood together. Allies used the white privilege to stand in the front of indigenous people while they prayed, and they said it to these officers, and they locked arms together, 50 of them, and I thought I was in the Twilight Zone. When I heard none of our indigenous brothers and sisters are going to jail today, and because of our white privilege, this is what we're going to do. And I thought, wow, we got a lot to share with each other in the healing process. And for you guys, I was able to witness so much of that beauty and to share it with you guys, is that healing was so important. And we're still hurting. The PTSD that comes from people just watching, and the people who they have this deep hurt for not being able to get there or make it there. And to know that you guys are all keyboard warriors, and just being here and sharing the message, whether you like it or not, that you're going to share this message.
Thank you. I know that this was my second time watching the film, and I'm really glad because I cried a lot less. And it's true. I was a mess the first time. And I think that you did a wonderful job catching the duality of both the difficulty and the abuses, as well as the beauty of being together and the strength of allyship. And that's what makes this so unique. And your vision's really wonderful. I want to share something with you personally, because I too do a lot of trauma training here, and I work with youth about moving beyond intergenerational traumas. And there is something about the way you filmed, the way you captured life, that actually, to me, it spoke to my DNA. It was like it's inside, and you did a beautiful job. Because it's so emotional. I warned Jeff I would cry. Sorry. But thank you. I'm one of the people that wasn't there. My daughter was there for a few months. but you did a great job translating to those of us who couldn't be there, and I know we're all very appreciative.
I wanted to share something about the DNA. One of the ladies was the herbalist that was there. She brought a lot of medicine with her, and she said, "This right here, Myron," she goes, "I'm going to give to you because you're out there and you're helping us rewrite our DNA." And I thought that was very powerful. And we're doing it together. We're doing it together. We're witnessing how to do it together, how we can forgive each other and move forward. Because as you heard the young lady sharing that what we do to our mother, we do to ourselves. And that's what we're seeing really heavy. And this is a youth and really a women-driven movement. And I'm just here to do what I can as a conduit to share that story.
You do a wonderful job, and I bet you the audience is dying to ask a few questions. Tim, I see your hand.
Can you talk about the divestiture campaign you're doing and how it works? And so, for example, you mentioned a number of banks, but do you go after them all at the same time, or do you try and take one and change that so that, you know, like I remember the auto workers always would pick one company to strike.
Well, that's an excellent question. So he wanted to ask about the divestment campaign and the strategy, whether or not there is one bank in particular that is being targeted or not. Hugh McMillan from Food and Water Watch in September created what is now an iconic graph of the 38 institutions, banks and financial institutions that have been funding the Dakota Access Pipeline, as well as its corporate funders, right? Because the Dakota Access Pipeline is owned by about 4 oil companies, ETP, ETE, Phillips, as well as Enbridge, right? So there's many companies that came together to create the Dakota Access Pipeline. And so part of the divestment campaign is to take money out of the Dakota Access Pipeline, but not merely just the project finance, the money that goes to the project itself, but also to ask these banks and financial institutions that you also need to divest your finance from these companies itself, from ETP, from these oil companies that are responsible for the indigenous human rights violations that you saw in Myron's film. And so there's several banks that are involved, and I think probably one of the most notorious that we have here in the United States is Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo not only funded the Dakota Access Pipeline, but it also funds private prisons as well as other intersectional oppressions that not only indigenous peoples suffer from, but the American people and the world. So we are really finding the nexus between states, corporations, and banks, and how they work together really to fund these extraction projects that are deleterious to indigenous peoples. And again, if you want to know more about the divestment campaign, I would go to Mazaska Talks, MAZASKA.org, and that is a resource where you can learn not only how to divest your personal accounts from these banks, but also how to divest your city and how to divest other aspects of your financial life. And so that divestment campaign is incredibly important because it really shows the incredible power that these banks wield over our lives and our economies. I don't know if you all have seen the Paradise Papers that have been recently published, as well as the tax havens that have been created in the Cayman Islands and other places to shield these multinationals and these other companies, to shield them from having to pay taxes. Right, so the American people have to pay taxes, but for some reason these companies that have millions of dollars don't have to pay any taxes at all, and they get to hide their money in the Cayman Islands. right? And so the problem that is happening in the Dakota Access Pipeline is a global problem that impacts each and every one of us. But Standing Rock has really illuminated that for everyone. And I would also say, in terms of Standing Rock, if we really want to see change in that situation, we have to start securing Indigenous peoples' title to land, not only in the United States but around the world. Indigenous peoples still do not have secure title to their lands and territories in 2017. That is the problem. We deserve to have our land recognized, and we're going to keep having problems in Indian country until that fundamental truth is recognized, that we are a people and we have rights and we are not going to go anywhere, and that you cannot come into our territories and destroy our people. This is not acceptable. Our people deserve to live. Our people deserve to have a future where we can live. And right now, corporations in the United States and the rest of the world are threatening our very ability to do that. And it is unacceptable.
Can you spell that again? Maza?
Mazaska, Mazaska talks, and Mazaska in Dakota, Lakota is money talks.
I also want to follow up to Tim that we'll get to you. That there have been movements at Tucson, Pima County, and U of A to divest. So those were started a while ago. Your question?
First of all, thank you so much for your film. My name is Pam Yushuk, and I, last year, along with my husband Bill Root, we run a magazine called Cutthroat, a journal of the arts, named after our indigenous trout in Colorado. And we have been raising money for the Standing Rock Sioux Water Protectors, the Friends of the Earth, and Southern Poverty Law Center, with an anthology that we put together very quickly last year called Truth to Power, Writers Respond to the Rhetoric of Hate and Fear. It includes many indigenous writers, including Natalie Diaz, Joy Harjo, Linda Hogan, Anita Andrezi, Michael Wasson, Bill Wetzel, Sherwin Bitsui. But we go around the country and we've been doing readings and sending money. And right now, what is the best place? We just did a reading at Amherst College, and so we have a little money to send. Where should we send it now?
I would send it right here. Right here.
Okay.
Because I'm sure Water Protective Legal Collective, you guys get that number real fast. And, and that's really clear. It's transparent. You can itemize it. And I think there's a list where you could also put it. Where would be the best way that they...
If you look online, there's a Water Protector Legal Collective. That is the collective that has been providing legal defense for the encampment since September, and they still need help finding legal defense and attorneys for the water protectors. There are still water protectors right now who need attorneys. So we cannot stop supporting this movement until each and every one of those water protectors are safe and supported, until the charges are dropped and that process is clear for them. And I can we can talk later if you need.
There was 831 that were arrested. I believe 400 right now are still there in the political system, as well as 150 with felonies. And 2 political prisoners, Red Fawn, who was at a halfway house, and Little Feather, who's still incarcerated.
I'll take a question here. 1, 2, and then 3.
Could you briefly speak to the definitions of sovereignty and self-determination? Because those are said a lot and they're not incredibly clear in layman's terms. Could you explain them? And Myron, could you explain why those were important to the film?
Robert Williams, so he wanted to understand the difference between sovereignty and self-determination. all I can say is that my professor, Robert A. Williams Jr., always says, I ask indigenous peoples throughout the world what their word is for sovereignty, and no one has a word. So sovereignty is not an indigenous concept necessarily, but peoplehood is, right? Indigenous peoples are people. We have laws, we have customs, and by virtue of our peoplehood, we have rights, legal, social, political rights. Peoples, under Article 1 of the UN Charter, all peoples have the right to self-determination, and by virtue of that right, they may freely dispose of their natural resources, etc. And so indigenous peoples are peoples because we are unique, we are tied to land, and we also have our own unique governments, such as the Navajo Nation government, such as the Tohono O'odham government, so on and so forth. And so when we talk about indigenous peoples and self-determination, we're talking about a very unique set of rights to land, such as free, prior, informed consent. And that is one of the rights that was denied to the Standing Rock Sioux, as well as many other tribal nations when it came to the Dakota Access Pipeline. They never gave their free, prior, and informed consent to have this pipeline go through their traditional territories, their ancestral and unceded lands.
I went to Standing Rock as a tribal member from one nation to another nation that was asked to come out and to practice my inherent right. And all you guys have that inherent right. For us, it's to harvest our traditional foods, our medicines, and hunt, have clean drinking water. And for you guys that have to pay for that, it's your inherent right to be able to survive that way in a good way. I use my tribal ID there as well, and I share with the officers, I'm here as a tribal from one nation to another nation. I'm not coming as a U.S. citizen. So that really hit them with this shock, and none of them ever asked me for my driver's license. You know, they were trying to process what I was saying. And this isn't, as you guys well know, this ain't taught in any of the schools. So, you know, we're really doing Indigenous 101 here. That's what the documentary is. And thank you for asking that question. It's important that you do ask those questions because we're constantly doing Indigenous 101. And there's over 500 nations, so there's a lot. And there's several nations that are still not federally recognized, but that doesn't mean they're not a nation. And the state of North Dakota didn't honor the nation-to-nation trust, responsibility, or any of the promises made. So when people ask, what can we do? I tell our allies is to hold yourself accountable to the promises your forefathers made to us. That's what you can do. And educate your circle and your family and say, you know what, this is a reflection of this country. So one side you have the American dream, on the other side you have the American Holocaust.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Question back here.
Thank you for your prayer. That was beautiful. And having been there, very hard to watch. There were a couple of things I thought might be footnotes. That one is the systematic militarization of the forces that were against us at the time. They were drawn in from state troopers from Ohio, and you may have better numbers than I have, and details, but Minnesota and various states and cities sent troops essentially to fight. The other thing was that I think that there were 400 plus indigenous nations represented, and at least one person from every country in the world. It may be a little fuzzy on that. And then one thing that I thought was very important, and you touched on and I know it was a lot of stuff to put through the grinder and come up with something. I think it was really concise and beautiful. The men camps needed to really, I think the people, if they knew what was really going on there, that's pretty outrageous. And thank you.
Thank you. The man camps are where the oil workers gather, and a lot of them are from small towns, places where there's not a whole lot of education, and they're getting paid a lot of money. And also the security, latent security, a lot of those guys were locals, and they played off their prejudice. And also I mean, they did so many, it's called the battle rhythm. If you're a vet, it's called a battle rhythm. That's what the Tiger Swan used, is to control the outcome. The two vehicles that were there were placed there, were documented, placed there. They tried to bring them through the reservation side, and they were stopped by tribal police. So they went around, and in the midst, when I saw those in the footage, I mean, things that they were doing is history repeating itself. And as I was flying, I seen that they had snipers up in the hills also. And so I made sure I documented this in case one of us was shot. And my drones were shot for documenting those things. Thinking about what we have to worry about as American citizens, and we're of two nations, United States and our indigenous nation. I'm from the Paiute Nation, and thinking about the feds on the tribal side and the different 9 agencies that were there, and the cross jurisdiction that happened with South Dakota High Patrol, and we call them the tree hugger feds, which was the Forest Service feds, and Homeland Security that was there, and Border Patrol that was there. There was many of the different securities that weren't even marked that were there, and the undercover that was there, the infiltrators pretending to be water protectors that was there. This was like some type of James Bourne movie, and we knew they were there, looking at them, looking at us. We were documenting them. And my final days there is when I finally said, we're no longer going to go back into Prairie Knights Casino, because it was completely almost feds. And I didn't want to be caught there in any way, shape, or form. And the suspicion that was happening between who do we trust, that was another one, because we witnessed it right in front of us. And it just continued. The Tiger Swan had labeled us in their reports as jihads. And so we've got a lot of educating to do. The veterans were upset with that, and they raised the barricade higher, which I documented. And from one of the security had said that was a lot to do the fear. So these officers, when they come down, they couldn't see who was drumming. They couldn't see who was there, women and children and elders. And it continued to be this battle rhythm, who controlled the narrative of this outcome. And I started documenting when prayer was happening, that they would line up on the other side of the mountain and wait. And they would come in as fast as they could, just to create this high energy amongst these new officers that were there. And as you can see, and through the film, they were rotating. They weren't the same people. And so there was officers I caught crying in the front, and I also caught laughing. So it was really hard to sometimes think this is twisted, but just to stay in prayer, and to know that a lot of the prayer was coming from all 4 directions. And when they would say, when you come to camp and come to the fire and pray in your own way, it's very powerful, because if you were Catholic, Mormon, Christian, Baptist, Jehovah, tree hugger, indigenous, you can pray in your own way, and no one felt like they had to pray one way.
In terms of the man camps, so whenever you have these extreme energy projects that are developed in Indian country, for example, the companies will usually fly in or transport in their own workers to work at these extraction sites. So for example, in North Dakota, at the Bakken field, which is where the extraction site is of the Dakota Access Pipeline, there in particular, there are man camps in the middle of the reservation in the country that house a couple hundred men that are all working at the oil fields. And what is incredibly hard for tribal governments is tribal governments' inability to have civil and criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians in Indian country, right? You wouldn't believe this, but the Supreme Court, through a series of court decisions, has limited the scope of tribal police and tribal governments to even go after non-Indians who commit crimes such as sexual assault and rape against Indian women. And so when these companies come in, not only do they bring in the contamination of the extraction itself, but they also bring in incredible social ills to which Indian nations do not have a ready, accessible remedy. In North Dakota, we have heard stories of women going missing and murdered, of young girls who have been trafficked, who have been sold into sexual slavery in some of these man camps. And there is very little, there has yet, for example, to be a federal inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women, and there should be. But when we have extraction problems, extraction that comes into Indian communities, Indigenous women specifically are impacted in very unique ways, and one of that is sexual assault. And what compounds that is tribal government's inability to prosecute those perpetrators. So that's one of the many problems that happens when these companies are able to develop Indigenous people's lands without any regard for how that development will impact the land and the people. So that we have to fight that as well.
Speaking from a behavioral health and also a cultural perspective, I think that exploring the link between, I think you said, you were talking about racism, that Native women are seen as rapeable. Native American women are raped at a higher amount, at a higher rate than other American women, and those are just the paltry statistics we have. 1 of 3 is the general number we use in Indian country. And it is a different type of rape. It's almost always by non-Native people. It's done in more public places, like a man camp kind of situation, and it's usually also done with more violence that ends them up in hospital stays more often. So it looks a little different, and so that's why I'm using the word rapeable. And when you link that with extraction, where Mother Earth becomes rapeable, it's all part of a larger system. Just wanted to add. You had a question over here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Myron, I spoke with you on the phone a couple of days ago about Dan perhaps coming here as well.
Is he here?
No, he's not. He's in Seattle. This film was very hard to watch, having been there. It was my 3rd time, and it's still hard. And I'm very grateful as well. I would give anything if you all would give at least a year of your time to educate us about the myriad of layers that you're introducing in this film.
Another camp?
Camp from the government and the oligarchy to camp in our community there. Everything. Lakota prayer, and it just everything. Women. Everything. At least 1 year. But ultimately, when we spoke, or what I recall is we still have water protectors that are under arrest. They illegally. They did nothing wrong. They were peaceful. They were in sovereign nation. It was not a government that, oh, sorry, thank you. It was not a government that invaded another nation because it was being threatened and its people were being threatened. It was a corporation invading a sovereign nation strictly for profit. That's an abomination. that these water protectors would be under arrest and under this kind of emotional distress is not acceptable. And I would like to know what we can do as a community here in Tucson to support in any way these water protectors in their legal defense. So it was a long description, but that was my ultimate question.
Well, in the beginning, I turned around with my shirt, and there's a number you can call directly.
I got
And
the legal
Michelle is here right now. You can get a hold of Michelle.
Okay.
But also, the allies that went there, you can share your experience that you were there, and what you witnessed was international energy company that had eminent domain
Right.
over the land, and they actually superseded the government and had all the resources at their disposal.
Right.
So you were there to witness that,
Yes.
and you were there to share your story, and you need to share your story around as an ally, and remember that as an ally, that this was an indigenous-led movement, and to remind everybody what it means to stand in prayer. But the other thing is that we've been going through this for the last 500 years. A lot of our people were already seasoned, and that's why they didn't stop. That's why they understood how to stay in prayer. We've seen the abuses of our communities, from the land, from the resources, the harvesting areas, our women, our language, indoctrination, and so many things of education and psychological warfare. So it's up, now that you witness that, it's up to our allies to open those doors and to make sure that we're able to come in and speak. And also, I like to say, I apologize ahead of time if our allies ask one of our indigenous people and they're angry with that, because we're all at different levels of healing. That's what I do know as a trainer. We're all at a different level of articulating the anger that we're feeling, or the frustration, and also the allies as well. And so that really does take a lot to educate yourself around counselors or historical trauma trainers to say, this is why I'm angry. When I'm looking and on my way over, I'm noticing that certain places had water and certain places didn't, and certain medicines were there, and the buildings that were around it, or things like that. I mean, when you're conscious and you do know those places and that they once did exist, and I hear elders always say, there used to be medicine right there, and now there's a building, or there's grass, and it looks pretty, but the medicine was more important. So we need you to help articulate that. And also, it doesn't give you the authority to start praying this way. You have to tell your own story. It's so important that you guys share your own story, because we are the media, and this is a community-driven, this was a community-funded project for the community, by the community, sustainable. It showed a collaboration of solar, wind. It showed resistance. It showed prayer. It showed all those things that we witnessed up there. And you can share that story. You guys can share this story. This is your story, and it's important that you share this story. And with social media, we had higher ground. We were able to share this fast, and as you guys started to see online, was we started to get media blackouts. And during the human rights violations, there's only 3 people online. 3 people online. An ally who was there, Unicorn Riot, and myself. And so that was something that you all need to be aware of, because the thing with privilege that you have is that we're in constant defense of our homeland. And that's why we're struck in poverty, because we've got to continually go to a place, again, where I shared with you in the court, that is predominantly a Western court, from the judge to the law, to who's setting on making the decisions, to where we got to pay our court fees, or any of those things that we're witnessing. So all the odds are against us already. And so this is not, I want you to know that, don't be angry, but be intellectually angry. What can you do? And you're going to have to challenge yourself and step out of your comfort zone and do something. And do it in a good way. And it's okay if you don't know. It's okay. I want to share with you, make sure you don't get discouraged if you go to this guy and he turns you away and doesn't want to help you. Keep going, because if you don't, then that falls back on you. And I've also witnessed many of the children from these officers and Bismarck come over to the camps. And I shared with them that you guys are the next generation as well, and that we're looking for you to change these laws. Well, this year, North Dakota made it illegal to wear masks. And they also tried to legalize it was okay to run over protesters. So you need to pay close attention to the laws and the legislature that's happening to around you. Because there's a website that is monitoring all of these things across the country. And so ignorance is not bliss. This is happening. And it's happening around you. And again, if you don't pay attention, it may not bother you, but it'll bother your grandchildren. They're going to grow up in this, and they're going to have to pick up the fight. And they're going to say, why didn't you tell us? And I say, oh, I didn't know. I'm real bad with Facebook. You know, I don't know how I always mess up my phone when I'm looking on the internet. Educate yourself. Invest in yourself. And to our indigenous people out there that are listening, invest in your children. Don't look to your tribal governments to invest in them. Invest in us. You're going to have to do it. And allies help them. Because what we did out there is the best we could. And one of the things that really sticks out, when Hollywood brought us all these cameras, they were big old cameras. And I just said, I want to thank you for bringing them, but we can't use them. And he says, why? I says, because it's HD. And he got a little offended. And I said, you can't discount our freedom. This is 4K. Because I know the outcome. They're going to use all their footage and media against us. And I could see that was happening in media, in nickel-dime journalism back in the day. Who controls the media controls the culture, you guys. We had to kick out Fox News 3 times. So if you guys who like Fox News, I'm sorry. And one of them was doing an interview, and he took off it, and he had ABC on there. So he was interviewing for both. So you have to be conscious, and there is help out there. And if you don't know technology, grab your niece or nephew or grandson or kids.
I would also say that you don't have to travel very far to find an indigenous human rights struggle right near you. We are here on the United States-Mexico international border that has cut into the traditional territories of the Tohono people, who are having incredible difficulties protecting their land, incredible difficulties crossing the border in order to observe their religious and cultural practices. Only to the north do we have the struggle of Oak Flat against the copper mining of Resolution Copper. Further north do we have the Navajo Nation struggle against the desecration of our sacred mountain, Doko Slid, from the San Francisco Peaks, from the city of Flagstaff. In Winslow, Arizona, one of our members, L'Oreal, was murdered by a police officer, and the Department of Justice says they will not investigate her death. In Chaco Canyon, right now, we have the Department of Justice and other agencies saying that they're going to allow drilling within the Chaco Canyon region, all the way from Alaska to the tip of Chile to Mauna Kea in Hawaii. There is an indigenous peoples struggling for justice and human rights. And so Standing Rock is just a case study, is just an example of what is happening throughout the world and what is happening to all of our forests and all of our waters. Each and every one of us has a role to play and is part of the solution in stopping the destruction of our Mother Earth. Yeah.
Any last words for the audience, Myron?
Know where your money's going. Divest. Educate the elders that are with us. Know where your home ownership is investing your money. And also be very, very kind to each other. That's really important, is that one of the things that I learned from Black Lives Matter, people that I met, and Occupy Wall Street and AIM and this movement, is that the hurt comes after, as we just witnessed historical trauma turn into current trauma together, and the desecration of sacred sites. And so be kind to each other. Right now we're seeing a lot of attacking, some real, some tiger swan, some trolls. And so it causes a lot of confusion. And what dismantles the movement is us. We get in our own way. And I want you to know this isn't about me being a filmmaker. I'm a conduit sharing a message with you of water protectors that can't be here and that need that voice. And I'm looking for you for that help and to realize that our existence is our resistance. And me to Numa Yadawa, just say my language to you is an example of that. And that we're saying it prideful now. And it's okay for us. And I forgive you. And I'm going to say that to as many people as I can that we need to do this together.
Thank you.